session. Obviously, it went a little long here, so I'll just walk over, take your questions. Let's give another round of applause for our speakers. So due to the short time constraint, make sure you ask a question quickly, and we'll get as many people as we can.
How do we combat, the BBC has just recently said that they're going to send all of their staffers to training sessions to make sure that deniers don't get overrepresented on their broadcasts. How do we attack those kinds of institutional biases that they clearly intend to use to squash our point of view?
Well, my microphone doesn't seem to want to turn on here.
It's on.
Is it on?
Yep.
Okay. I was looking for the green light. I'm hearing impaired. I have an 85% hearing loss, and so I could not understand a word you said. However, James here is going to interpret for me.
Yeah, the question was, how do we combat BBC censoring climate deniers and making sure they don't make it on air?
Well, that is a really good question and a very tough question. Probably the best way is to go around them and to speak to alternate media and say, I have a story, and the BBC refuses to report it. You're a competitor to the BBC. I'm going to give you exclusive access to this story, and you can just simply run it as you see fit or deal with it as you see fit. But the BBC, just simply by their policy, refuses to deal with it. So I'm going to make that an advantage for you.
If I can add to that very quickly, there's a reason why Fox News started. People complain about Fox News. If the three main networks and CNN had been fair, there wouldn't be a market for Fox News. This is why we have blogs like Anthony's showing up all over the internet. All they're doing is digging their own graves and making sure that their own credibility drops lower and lower and lower, and there will be replacement news sites, websites popping up, and this is the ultimate act of democracy, blogs like Anthony's, to present the truth that the BBC won't cover.
Yeah, I'll just say one other quick thing. In Canada, we face exactly the same thing with the BBC. Our CBC is doing exactly the same thing. They haven't officially announced anything, but they certainly do that. And when I'm actually introducing Pat Michaels at the presentation tomorrow, I'll describe one of the ways that we were able to expose them. I think that as much as possible, we have to convince the public to take what they hear from the CBC and the BBC with an enormous grain of salt. Okay, so we use other media to basically discredit them.
Two quick questions. If we have to spend $1 billion a day to do research on global warming, and we've been doing it for 10 or 15, 20 years, where's the greenhouse gas theory? I can't find it. I see lots of different variations, and they look more like greenhouse gas hunches. And so I don't think it actually exists, and therefore I don't understand where the consensus comes from.
Yeah,
and real quick, the last thing I want to say is, I have trouble in communicating with the left because they worship hypocrisy and they outlaw logic and reason.
I'll just clarify, the $1 billion a day is called climate finance, okay? That's different to climate research. It's things like building mitigation projects. In particular, alternative energy is the biggest of the mitigation projects. That's 94% of the $1 billion a day. Adaptation, of course, is generally boots on the ground, moving people, building dikes, building wells, hardening infrastructure. These are not things that make a lot of money for the big companies anywhere near as much as mitigation. And that's why I think that the UN shot for a 50-50 division between mitigation and adaptation. The 94-6, I think, is a function of the fact that big companies like General Electric make a lot of money through mitigation projects.
That's not the point. The point is, if you need research, you don't have a theory yet. There's no consensus on it.
Yeah, well, actually, a funny point is if the science is settled, we don't need any research. I'll just say one thing quick. Howard Hayden had a good joke. He basically said, we know that the science isn't settled. It's disproven by the letter S. I said, Howard, how do you disprove a theory by one letter? He said, if the climate theory was settled, there would be a climate model, not models that predict everything from no change to catastrophe.
I deal in the public policy arena, and even when I find bureaucrats at a, a modest level, or there who would agree with those of us in this room. They have their marching orders, and their paychecks and careers are dependent on falling into line. And in fact, the reason that I'm here is simply to find strategies for changing the paradigm. And that's, I guess, the fundamental issue is how do we change and affect the decision makers themselves?
How do we change and affect?
Go ahead, speak up.
How do we change and affect bureaucrats, decision makers, get them to do what must be done?
Boy, you guys are really asking me the tough questions today. First it was the monolithic BBC, and now how do we make the government change? I think the only way that you can do this is to just continue to speak the truth. You just have to pound it in day after day after day. And where there is something that is a complete disconnect, you have to make it obvious to them that they've made a mistake. And oftentimes they won't admit to it, or they won't retract it, or they won't change it. But they'll remember that the next time that someone's watching and someone's going to call them on it. And I think that's really the only thing we can do. Just keep doing what we're doing, catching the mistakes, making sure that they are solidly rebutted, and do not do anything that's going to inflame these folks, because they're all very plotting. Not plotting, but plotting with a D. They just kind of plod along and they do their thing. And so, sometimes excitement is not a good thing for them.
Yeah. I think also you have to look at the problem through their eyes. You have to see it through their worldview. They like things like foreign aid. A major magazine on our side would not publish our news release from Copenhagen because we were advocating adaptation. He said, oh, that's foreign aid, and foreign aid never works. Okay, so I mean, that is the opposite extreme. I think that we have to look at it through left-wingers' eyes and see what will appeal to them, see what is their worldview. They don't like seeing Africans starving. Okay, so let's help them now. The UN said 2 years ago there were 1 million children at risk of starvation in the Sahel. Okay, we didn't get enough money to help them. Oh, but we had enough money for stopping climate in the year 2080. So I mean, even the left are starting to see that the outcome of this policy, whether it's right or wrong scientifically, is immoral in many cases. Okay, and that's why this course is so good, the Science Wars, is they look at how the natural philosophers, the people who not just looked at science, but they looked at the world view and how the theory of knowledge evolved, things like that. It's really important because it allows us to understand that in many cases, the science is just a social construct of the scientists involved, and their worldview very much determines what they determine. So I think that's the way to go, is to look at it in their eyes.
As a legislator, are there places where you compile facts? The topic of this debate was debunking the myths and the other things. It would be easier for people in a political debate, for example, if there's a place where you can go and there are facts that refute other things and you can do it quickly. Because you find often that you've got to look at 50 different websites, and the unfortunate reality is that as a legislator, I might have 50 different issues that I'm playing with. And so if I've got to find 50 different websites, I'll never be able to find it in time, because now you're right, I've got to combat CNN, I've got to combat the LA Times, I've got to combat all of those journals, and virtually every university in the state of California says that if we don't do this tomorrow, that the world's going to end. And when you drill down you don't have to go very far, you can refute it, but you have to search, I mean, imagine, Mr. Taylor, you're in court, but you're in trial right now, and you have all that data someplace, but it doesn't do you any good if you can't present it to the jury in real time.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question. A couple points. First of all, at the Heartland Institute, we make it a point to try to get this information to legislators, especially at the state level. And this is where the battles are being fought. People focus on Congress, but it's at the states where you have the renewable power mandates, you have all sorts of other cap and trade laws that are being proposed. We produce on a very regular basis research and commentaries that'll tackle one specific question, and we'll give you a short summary, and then we'll link to the various scientific studies for backup data. We also have, I'm trying to think of the proper word. I mean, if it were in written form, it'd be a pamphlet where we put together say the top 10 points on this topic and where you back it up. And then also on our website, it's heartlands.org. We have a policy bot, and it's kind of like a Google search, except that it's specific to these topics. So you can type in, for example, if you want to type in climate change, or if you want to type in crop production or ethanol, and it'll show what we've published, but not just what we've published. We bring in all the studies from the other think tanks, we bring in the scientific papers, and that's a good place to start. And then finally, if you have a topic that you know you'll be addressing, or that has, someone's asking you about, you can always email us. You can email me personally, jtaylor@heartland.org. And I'd be happy to send that to you. But I understand how frustrating it is, because sometimes when I'm writing columns, I know the data's out there, and it takes me a while to find it. And that's a great question.
I'll just say also, go to the NIPCC, because there's summaries at the beginning of each chapter, phenomenal summaries. They're just short, brief things that can be put right into newspaper articles. And then all the references are there if you want to read the details. But the NIPCC is astoundingly good.
All right, everybody, it's 11 o'clock. We're going to wrap up with the last two questions. We're going to go a little bit over if you guys are willing to. So this gentleman's been waiting patiently, so we'll make sure he gets to go.
Really a question about language. Very often the statement will be made, I believe in global warming. That's not something about facts. That is a religious statement. And often we talk about facts. How do we connect across that divide? There are those that are interested in the facts and think they have them, but the large majority, I think, are operating from a religious framework rather than a knowledge framework.
The question is, how do we reach people who are viewing this through I believe, not necessarily having the facts to support them? How do we reach them with facts?
I think the way that you reach people is to kind of shock them out of their stupor a little bit. Like that story I relayed about the fellow yesterday that asked me the question, are we doomed? Are we past the point of no return? And I showed him this graph, and he was shocked, and he'd never seen it before. We have to point out those kinds of obvious visuals to them, because the story basically is really simple that's being pushed out in the press. You put stuff in the atmosphere, it gets hotter, end of story. That's really all they've got in terms of the story. There's details, of course, but that's really the main message. And what we have to do is show the reverse of that. Yes, stuff's been put in the atmosphere, but look, it hasn't gotten hotter. That's really the message we have to put across. At least in the last 17 years, anyway.
Back.
That's yeah. I believe very strongly in the power of truth and the power of science. Sometimes people say you're too optimistic and you're going to fail, but when I started at the Heartland Institute, the polling numbers on global warming, the American public were overwhelmingly believing the Al Gore storyline. I was told that, James Taylor, you and the Heartland Institute, you are undermining your own credibility on all these other issues that are near and dear to us freedom-centered folks, and you need to just shut up on this. And we said, no, the truth will win out. And now, over time, when we first started on this issue, half the Republicans wouldn't talk to us, none of the Democrats. Now, Republicans, very few will, and many Democrats will as well. And it's not just conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat. There are many Democrats, there are many liberals, there are many socialists, going around the globe who we work with who understand the science. And I think as long as we keep presenting the science, public opinion, the public will get it, and government, it may not be instantaneous, but government responds. And I think your point is a great one, but I believe we'll win out.
On the issue that was raised earlier about the mentality of the left, of the global warmers, It's almost religious. They need a certain moral cause. And I think by maybe refocusing that moral cause on the harm that would occur to the peoples of Africa and elsewhere, we can maybe shift by showing them what the real effects would be and what it would do to these people. But my question, my issue relates back to what was talked about earlier about finding the facts, getting the facts, and the difficulty, as a legislator mentioned, about doing that. It is a serious problem of digging out the facts in a usable form. The left, the other side, has sessions, has conferences to train speakers, to provide speakers with literally a format, an outline, fill in the blanks with this quote, that quote. They give them all that little data stuff, so it's right there for them to utilize. They go out and talk to rotaries and what have you around the country. It would really be helpful because so many of us are laymen, do not work in the field, do not have time to do all the research, to summarize, not just summarize, but also put in the little quotes from the different sources under each major topic that can be readily accessed to go and fight back, to talk back, to have that information at our fingertips. And we would be so thankful to the work that you people have done and would do to help get that information in a more usable form. And I know you talked about NIPCC, that report, Reconsidered 2, the climate change, that is monumental. What an incredible presentation that is. But digging through it, trying to find and pull out the nuggets and the quotable things is difficult for most of us. So I ask that more work be done to make the information more readily accessible for people to use in a quick format.
Yeah, I just recommend go to the summary for policymakers of each of the NIPCC reports. If you go to climatechangereconsidered.org, you get, very, very quick stuff. I'll have it right beside me when I'm doing radio interviews, and I'll quote right out of it. They've done a super job on summarizing, because your point is totally valid.
And as far as more concise and presentable information, if you go to my personal website, jamestaylorpolicy.com, I have I have videos of me giving talks in which I give my PowerPoint presentation. I have various PowerPoint presentations, and I believe I have the slides themselves available. And those are designed to connect with people that don't have the PhDs and whatever, and that you can present it in 10, 15, 20 minutes. And I'll make sure we get that on the Heartland website as well. Thank you.
That's good.